All right, real quick, here's myself and Peter just to talk about David Wright. As most of you know, if you don't already, you're living under a rock, but the Mets are taking some time to retire David Wright's number today. And Peter and I just want to take a moment to talk about how we feel about it. Peter, what's on your mind?
Well, a lot of mixed emotions. David Wright was absolutely he was the player of my generation when you think of the New York Mets. Um, he always gave 100% on the field. He was great on and off the field. Unfortunately, him giving 100% on the field all the time is probably what led to the abrupt end of his career. Um, and even then, even in that, he fought tooth and nail to come back for this team for the playoffs in 2015. He hit that, which I think is the David Wright moment, hitting that home run in the World Series when the Mets were already down 1-0. Even obviously that didn't go the way any of us wanted, but just the fact that he was able to get there, and then he re-hurts his back, and he fights tooth and nail to come back, so he can proudly say that his daughters got to see him play. You know, with David Wright, it's obviously it's impossible to have those feelings of what could have been if he stayed healthy. Would we have another Hall of Fame player? Would we have perhaps won that World Series in 2015 if we had peak David Wright? But we didn't, and he didn't. And these are unfortunately the realities we live in. But that's not the reason why I wanted to do this or wanted to come on here. I wanted to celebrate David Wright, even in a small way. Um, he was, like I said, he was the New York Met of my generation. When you thought of the New York Mets, you thought of David Wright. The Yankees fans had Derek Jeter, and we had David Wright. And I dare I say, there's nobody that's who you want to. That's who is personified of what it should mean to be a New York Met is David Wright.
Yeah, the David Wright legacy for me is such a tough one to swallow because I openly talk a lot about the fact that I don't believe in sports karma and things like that, but I would have believed in sports karma if David Wright had a title under his name. And I say that because you hear a lot of random little phrases thrown around over the years about playing the game the right way or things like that. But really, nobody on nobody has anything negative to say about David Wright. And I'm really proud that he's one of ours. I obviously taking on the Mets, I'm one of those people that I didn't grow into it as a family. I learned baseball here growing up after learning cricket. So for me, it's a little different. I chose the Mets, which a long string of bad decisions obviously started with choosing the Mets, but I chose the Mets. And so you pick your guys and you stick to your guns. That's one thing I always say. And so David Wright was a big part of finding enjoyment in the Mets for me. I I just said it, but it's really nice to say he's one of ours. I was rereading the Players Tribune article, and the reason I might sound emotional or seem emotional is that this is supposed to be a happy day. This is supposed to be something that we say they're retiring five. He deserves it, which he does. He's going to be emotional, and all rights to him for that. We'll all be emotional, and it's easy for someone to say from the outside, "Hey, this guy didn't win a ring for you. What gets you so emotional about it?" And for me, it's the idea of is what Peter was saying, what could have been. I get emotional on behalf of David Wright because if you've never seen the Players Tribune article where he talks about being a Met, he talks about a lot of things that are near and dear to my heart, but it's also the idea of you can tell that for him, his own story is encapsulated by what could have been and what more he wanted to give and what more he could have done. He talks about the fact that he wanted to do more. And the reality of it is that he gave quite a lot to the Mets and the Mets fans, and we love him for that reason. At the end of the day, this is a guy that when we wanted to say this is what a Met was like, David Wright was that guy. Other opposing teams liked him. Opposing fans, even some of them say nice things about him. It's just hard for me because of the fact that if you think about people who deserve things, I mean, sure, David Wright deserved a lot more than what he got. And I think that that's the part that hurts me emotionally because you the Mets are in a situation where, I wrote something along many years ago, about 10 years ago, in regards to the Mets and being perennial underdogs and how logistically in New York and Queens, we are underdogs by trade. And so we're a lot more Mets than we are Yankees. The day-to-day people that are on the podcast here, like me and Peter, and even the guys that were on with us, we were always more Mets than Yankees. And I'm not talking about fandom. I'm saying that we're a lot more underdogs in our day-to-day life than we would like to admit, perhaps. And that's the natural connection to a team that is an underdog, or in a town like New York City, Queens, New York, the Mets being the underdog and being called the little brother. You relate a lot more to that than you do mass amounts of success, unless somebody who's watching this is secretly, a 7 billionaire or something like that. So, right, encompassing that, and he kind of encapsulates what it means to be a Mets fan in that way, because he burned really brightly, and that star was so bright to the point where he was one of the best players in the league. And at the end of the day, it's still difficult because it almost feels like the lesson is you can do everything the right way, but if things don't break your way without a little bit of luck, it's just not going to work out for you. And I think that's why it's so heartbreaking, because there are players who are far less talented or far worse people than David Wright who have tasted more success than he have. And for me, that bothers me. And it always will. I'm not going to sit there and say that doesn't make me sound like a homer, because this is one of the few times I get to wax poetic about a Met, but it will bother me and get to my heart. And so that's where I stand here. I'm very happy for him. I'm happy that the Mets organization is giving him the respect and love he deserves. But it can be a little heartbreaking when I think of the saga of David Wright, because whenever you think of an athlete and the first things you think of are what could have been, it does hurt a bit when it's one of your own, especially one that you think that deserves it, right?
Yeah, and I think you said it perfectly. It's not even a longing for, oh, what for, for me, like, oh, what could have been. It's for him. Like, you wanted it just as badly for him. Like, he grew up a Mets fan. The minor league team used to be in Virginia, where he's from. He played for them. He made his way up in 2004. And he was just a consummate professional the entire way. Veterans of the team when he came up had nothing bad to say about him. Really, the only negative thing, and I put negative in air quotes, was the whole sandwich thing with Noah Syndergaard. And even then, that was just kind of funny. Looking back on it, that's kind of funny. But yeah, he's definitely one of those players. They don't come around too often, but that you look at their career and you just feel bad for them. And all that aside, I I truly hope, and Steve and Alex, this is probably the thing that they're best at. They're since they've been owners of the Mets, is honoring the past history, not sweeping it under the rug or we don't need to get into what the old ownership did, but every single veteran, that has pretty much had a microphone put into their face and asked about Steve and Alex, had nothing but positive things to say about. And I believe that they're going to do a great job again today, and they're really going to honor David, the baseball player and the man. And there's not a whole lot to always be happy about being a Mets fan, but everything David Wright gave you, you can be happy about. And today, I think it's going to be, while yes, there will be an undercurrent of sadness, I believe overall the day will be a happy day.
I think that one of the things too that will always stick with guys like you and I as well is the fact that he was a Met for life. Yes, his career was shortened by injury and everyone can talk about it, but the peak of his career was something special, and we saw that all with the Mets. That's exactly how it worked out from beginning to end. This is a guy that was a Mets fan, became a Met, got the captain symbol, and just played his entire career here. And so, I mean, if David Wright doesn't make the Hall of Fame, which I can understand the argument for, he's one of those poster childs for the Hall of Very Good and what could have been. And it's tough because some of those Hall of Very Good guys are they just had the full career and didn't have enough. David Wright, it's definitely a what could have been. And it's nice. I mean, just looking back and seeing these, like just looking at the photo you put together here, right? I'm looking at the white Mets jerseys and David Wright. And if you show me those just standard, like these pinstripe Mets jerseys, I think of David Wright in the 5 on, like that's the one that comes to mind right off the bat. And so, and I'm glad you gave.
Do you know where that picture's from? I'm sure
No,
you can figure it out.
if I had to guess, I probably could. But I'm looking
from the home run he hit in the World Series.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because you left the catcher in the ump, and I'm like, I feel like you cut it right out of the. It's good for him. I'm glad he got to enjoy that. I'm glad he put the MVP on there too, because that made me smile. Considering that I think he should have had that MVP. That 2007 year was heartbreaking.
That's what the fine print says. We all know he should have won it in 2007.
Yeah, but he's definitely. I'm glad he's getting what he deserves. To the Coens' credit, as you were saying, I'm glad that they are so, I guess, energetic, enthusiastic about showing respect to the history of the Mets organization, what it means to us, because you said this very honestly, and it's true. We don't always get a lot to hold on to as Mets fans, and they can't take David Wright from us. So I'm glad that he's getting what he deserves today. I'm glad that he's getting a ceremony and love and an adulation from across the league, from players that, Travis d'Arnaud, I was saying earlier, was even taking time and called him D-Dub, which for the record, I did not know was his nickname. I learned today that his nickname was D-Dub, which made me almost embarrassed, because I'm like, I am a Mets fan. Shouldn't I know this? Like, shouldn't I? But here we are. Yeah, and I can't express how happy I am for him. I don't want to lag on to the bittersweet feeling, because I know that most of us do feel that way. And it's hard, but good for David Wright that he gets today. Good for the Mets for honoring him. And thank you for being one of ours and choosing to do that for the entirety of your career, because that means something to us, even if it doesn't mean anything to the rest of the world.
Thank you, David, for everything. You were a consummate captain on and off the field, and I hope you will always be linked to the to the Mets organization. I'd love for them to open up a position for him to be some sort of ambassador, or that he'll be around more. But he also, if he wants to be around his family. I get that too. But
yeah, if he's willing to give us a little more of his time, I'm sure the entirety of the Mets fan base will be more than happy to take a little more of his time.
Yeah.